Hey, everybody, welcome to Strike Up the Band. This is Mike Miller, and I'm really fortunate today to have Alex Iles as my guest. Alex is a very versatile trombonist in the Southern California area. He has uh, played on the soundtrack of many movies and TV shows. He plays classical, he plays jazz, he's in the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, and just a very versatile guy. So, Alex, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me, Mike. It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure to come in.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet Alex last summer at the Southeast Trombone Symposium down in Georgia, and got to hear him play a little bit, and that was a lot of fun. So,
Great event.
yeah, it really was. That was the fourth time I'd been, I think.
Wow, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's my first time there, and I just thought it was great. A lot of people from all over, and just a really nice opportunity. It's so well organized. Brad does a great job down there at Columbus State. It's terrific.
yeah, it's mostly for college students, but they let a few of us old guys go just for fun.
Sure.
So, um, so you said just now, I guess you could give us the nickel tour
Sure.
of your music career, and then we can maybe dig into a little more detail certain aspects.
Sure. I grew up in Southern California, and I went to a school in Arcadia. I went through elementary school and everything in Arcadia, and they had a really nice music program there. It was kind of an innovative program at the time. And a lot of us were in the elementary music program, instrumental program, orchestra and band. And that's where I learned to play. I didn't have private lessons very much at all until I was older, much older. And but we had a really good marching band and stuff like that here. So I was always really active in music. When I got out of high school, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do professionally at all. And even what I wanted to study in college, I was sort of up in the air and open. My parents encouraged me to follow a more traditional liberal arts education, sticking with things that were kind of an open end, not necessarily specializing in anything too soon. They really wanted me to get the most out of my education. And that's what my interest was too. I wanted to continue learning about things I didn't know that much about, that I wanted to continue learning how to write and read more stuff, and be able to figure out how to think for myself a little better. And that's what I really did in college, especially the first couple of years. But I was playing all the way through school. I was playing as much as you possibly could play. Especially for a non-music major at that point. So I was in after my freshman year, I got to participate in the Disney All-American College Band, which is a group that plays every summer, and it's made up of people from all over the different schools and universities around the United States. And that was a great experience because the players were incredible, and the whole program was organized really well to introduce you to not only to have a job where you performed in Disneyland, but also we had clinics and workshops with professionals from all over the different phases of the music business. So I got a little exposure to what the business was like besides just playing music. And that was really interesting. I found out that entire summer was really one of the best summers ever. It was just a great opportunity. I made some really good friends in that group too that I stay in touch with to this day. And then after when I was in college, a couple of summers that I was there, I went to the Aspen School of Music, and that was kind of an intensive music experience where I finally did get some private lessons. And I was new to that, and so I had to really learn about taking a lesson on a regular basis, which some people, a lot of people, they play violin, you learn that when you're 3 years old. So I had a lot of making up to do, and I enjoyed that, and I had very patient teachers. And I also while I was there, I was invited into the orchestral rotation because sometimes they needed players. I went out there originally on a jazz fellowship because I really was starting to play jazz when I got to college. I didn't play any in elementary or junior high or high school. So then after I got out of college, I really wasn't sure I was going to do. Did odd jobs. I interviewed for some other work outside of music, and then I was studying with a great teacher in Los Angeles who taught all the commercial kind of freelance trombone players in Los Angeles named Roy Main. And he became my primary teacher. And he was great. I studied with him for about 3 years. And he actually got me on some professional engagements here and there, either to sub for him or to play with him on certain things. And all the great players from Southern California that were around my age had studied with Roy, Alan Kaplan and Andy Martin and Bob McChesney, everybody, that had studied with Roy. So he was a really good teacher for all of us. And after that, I was invited. I went on a cruise ship and did actually my first real professional job. Roy sort of helped me hook up with those people, and I went out on a cruise ship for 4 months and basically learned how to play that kind of work, dance jobs and things like that, playing for people that in 1984, 85 were sitting in their 70s. So you can imagine the repertoire was pretty old. And so I learned all those old songs, and that really helped my ear playing and my jazz playing a lot too. So then after that, I came back to Los Angeles. I was kind of, now I could work on these other kinds of jobs besides just, playing brass quintet or other little jobs that most people do. And so, and I was also starting to teach about then. So I was making a okay living. I could pay the rent with my little cache of opportunities in Los Angeles, and occasionally doing a little bit of recording for people that was very, hey, can you come over and play for me on this thing I'm doing? And and then I went out on the road for a few years with Maynard Ferguson, and
Oh,
that was a great opportunity. That goes back to the All American College Band. One of my colleagues from that band told me that, hey, they're looking for a trombone player, and you should send in a tape. And I said, well, I don't have a tape. He said, well, we'll make one. Send it in. Okay. So I scrambled together some dough and went into a studio with some players and recorded a little demo tape, and I got the job. And I toured with Maynard Ferguson for almost 2.5 years, and it was great experience. Really getting to travel, playing my horn every day, following Maynard's lead. And that way, he was so good at being able to get up and deliver every night on as a leader and as a soloist, and it was pretty inspiring. I found that very impressive. And
was
yeah.
excuse was that when he still had the full size big band?
No, I actually joined. I replaced Steve Wiest, and by that time, the band had reduced to a two trumpets, trombone, and two saxophones, five horn, which was actually really fun because we played a lot of sort of big bandy kind of music, but it was with this sort of a horn section more than a brass section, and it was a blast. I had a good time playing with that band. A lot of the arrangements were for that group specifically. And so later on, I went out with the larger band when he reformed what became known as the Bebop Nouveau band. And that was with still small. It was two trombones, four saxes, and 4 or 5 trumpets. And that was a lot of fun too. That was when he reintroduced that group to the world, and we did a recording with him doing that stuff. And it was great. But traveling and touring all over the country, getting to know the education world through that Maynard had been such a part of, and meeting band directors and sort of getting to know what they're all about and how they bring in guest soloists and stuff. That was helpful because I started doing that quite a bit myself after I left the band. So that was real pivotal experience. And then when I came back to Los Angeles, I kind of had a credit, so I could start working a little bit more in other bands and stuff. People knew who I was from that. So then I had an opportunity to go out with the band I always wanted to play with when I was younger, and I never thought I would, which was Woody Herman's band. That was the band that I looked up to the most. That was like the New York Yankees to me. And I was like, wow, I'd love to. There's no way I could ever play with that band. But as fate had it, the two tenor trombone players at the time, John Fedchuk and Paul McKee, were leaving, and they contacted myself and John Allred to replace them. So that was incredible. I had about a year on that band. That was great, getting to play music with all that music from going back to the 40s all the way up to present day, all of John Fedchuk's incredible arrangements. It was fantastic, and the band
Yeah,
was really great. And it was everybody we were the new guys, and everybody else in the band had been rode pretty hard, so they had road chops for that book, and it was just so fun to play with that band. And so that was a very important experience in my life, in many ways. So that was great. And so then I came back to Los Angeles and I started freelancing more. I actually started working at Disneyland, which was a real hotbed of great players in that time in the 80s and early 90s. And so I played in a lot of groups. Wayne was there, Andy Martin was there, Sal Lozano, Eric Marienthal, most of the core of the Jay Mason, of the core of the Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band, were all working at Disneyland at that time. So that's where we all kind of met and played together a lot. So we had, that was that. So that became that experience that turned into that later on, a few years later. So that was good. And then I started doing a few more recording sessions about that time. I was doing lots of different work. I was playing shows, Broadway type shows. I was doing casual work, which is what we call on the West Coast. They call club dates back east, but doing casual work like weddings and bar mitzvahs and corporate events and things like that, playing in rock horn sections, doing original projects, all of both live and recorded. And then I started doing a little bit more recording, and the contractors who contract that work through the union here started getting my name thrown at them, and it took a while for them to maybe call me that first or second time. And then I'd get in thrown in there on a movie or a TV show at one of the nice sound stages here. And then it would, I wouldn't do it again for sometimes a year later. But then slowly but surely, I started doing that a little bit more. And that's my primary way of making a living now, as far as being a musician, is doing TV and film work. And then I'd still play a lot live. I love doing live music. I play in a lot of different bands and groups, and I've sometimes put together chamber groups for things. And there's sometimes a series that somebody might say, hey, you have a brass quintet? And I'll go, yeah. So it's fun to be able to just say yes and put something together and play a little concert series that's in town. And maybe a composer wants to record a piece, and we do that. We just did that last week for a friend of mine who was a violist, who I didn't even really know who was a composer. Turns out he's a great composer. And I asked him, I said, have you written any brass stuff? He said, well, yeah, like when I was in college, I wrote a brass quintet. I said, let's record it. He went, really? I said, yeah. So we did that. So that was a lot of fun. And, so it's just things like that come up. And then with COVID, well, let me go back. Around 2000, right before 9/11, I really had sort of this midlife crisis where I went back and decided that I wanted to really start exploring orchestral music more seriously. I'd always been pretty comfortable doing playing like a large tenor and playing in an orchestra. I was pretty good at it. I was raised primarily playing that kind of music. So I got back into it. I was sort of establishing myself as sort of a jazz commercial kind of player. But I was really interested in trying to develop that more just for fun. I wasn't thinking of it professionally. I was just really wanted to explore that music. It's how can you not want to play all that music? So I eventually ended up at Joe Alessi's seminar. So I went to the Alessi seminar, and that was great. I told Joe, we're about the same age. So I told Joe, you got to treat me just like you're treating all these guys right out of college. I want you to really don't be afraid to, say the truth, and I can take it. I'm here to get better. So he did. He was great. He pointed out some really important things that I needed to hear from somebody in his position who's doing that kind of music all the time. I'd never really had regular lessons with someone of his level of being in an orchestra. I mean, I'd taken a few lessons with Ralph Sauer, who was fantastic, but Joe was the first person who was like more my age and sort of was right in it at the level that it had become, which was different, I think, in a lot of ways, just a different way of playing had sort of developed over those years. So I really got a lot of important lessons. And then I came back to town and I won an audition that was for the Long Beach Symphony, where I played to this day. So it was that was a real pivotal thing. And when that happened, when I happened to win this audition, I kind of went in pretty loose and not really expecting much. It was just an exercise for me just to, have something interesting musically to do. I started getting more calls for film work because the type of music that was being done, especially for movies and TV, was tended to be more classically oriented. And because I had sort of proven that I'm comfortable with that kind of music and had pursued it, that became very helpful to me, and totally unintentionally, but that is sort of when I started doing more film and television work, getting on more lists. I'd been on a few lists before, but then all of a sudden I was starting to get called more often. And so that was it. That's really it. I've been sort of on a path for the last 20 years that sort of followed that initial thing, but nobody in the studios really, there are very few people that get discovered and suddenly get a break and they're in. It usually takes most of us, at least 5 or 10 years before you even know where you stand. It takes a long time. It's word of mouth, and there's no roster per se that puts you in some place that is magically allowing you to have a career. Most of us do lots of different things, either with our instruments or through other means. It might be in music, it might be arranging or teaching or other stuff. So the freelancers tend to have a lot of things that they do to pay the rent. And some people do things outside music to supplement too. It's pretty normal. So some people get into instrument design or repair and those sorts of things. Or a couple friends of mine have music stores that they run. It's all good. It's all part of the community. And if you want to, however you can share your musical knowledge, I think is it, and be able to connect with people, and you can make some money at it. That's the story. Everybody has different ways of doing that. And so anyway, so that's sort of where my career paths has sort of been so far. Anyway.
Yeah, it's quite versatile. Uh, I'm curious. I'm just would love to know how when you're doing a movie session or something, just how that whole thing works. What's the process for getting a movie soundtrack recorded?
Well, it's pretty long. I mean, it's years in the making before you finally get the call to come and record the music. I mean, we're the last thing in that process. Um, Usually a director may or may not have an idea of the kind of music that they want for their movie. That's kind of arrived at by several. It's usually kind of a committee of people that might decide. There's people. There are all these interesting positions and jobs in Hollywood that are to do with music and movies. There's music supervisors. There are music editors as well, and a lot of times they're the first people that are part of the. Sometimes even before the composer, they're kind of brought in. The director might have a music editor that they're working with who actually puts together what's called a temp score, which is very often music from different movies, or people have libraries now of all different kinds of music from other movies or from classical music or a song. That's another conversation, is how people deliver songs to a movie. That's a whole other side of the work. Sometimes we're involved with that, other times not. But very often they come up with what's called a temp score. And the famous story about temp scores is the movie 2001. That entire score that we all know, if you're familiar, old enough to remember that movie.
I'm definitely old enough.
Yeah. It starts with Also Sprach Zarathustra, plain as day. And there's all this music by, there's all that stuff by Varese and different composers. And there's some the waltzes by Strauss and all this music that is sort of unusual and was, for the time, was kind of an unusual choice. The whole idea of a score a movie taking place in outer space or in the future was still finding a musical archetype that wasn't real clear. The old movies that had like Buck Rogers and those sorts of movies, that music was a little over the top for that Stanley Kubrick movie. Stanley Kubrick really wanted something different than that. The movie was so different from anything like that that anybody had seen. So anyway, they used that, and that was a temp track, and they actually recorded a score by a great composer from the 60s and 70s named Alex North. Alex North was as well known at the time as John Williams. He was a kind of that kind of composer, big epic orchestral kind of composer, and he wrote a great score. As a matter of fact, I played it with the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra one summer with the film 2001, just a few scenes to see what it would have been like had they decided on Alex North's score, which was terrific. But I gotta say, the way we think of the movie now, it's so different with any other kind of music. I mean, to me, starting with Also Sprach Zarathustra and having all that avant-garde stuff that, when they were going into the middle of the stars or whatever it was that was going on there. I'm still not sure what was going on in that movie. It's crazy.
I don't think anybody does.
But they used all that atmospheric vocal music that was so interesting and perfect for that in the temp. So that was an example of a movie that used a temp track. So that's music editors and music supervisors very often are people who suggest musicians or composers or artists to a movie. There's a whole lot of jobs for music supervisors. They do a lot of work coordinating some of the budgets and stuff with the studios and stuff too. So there's all these jobs that are some of them are kind of executive jobs. Some of them are, to do with the artistic choices as well. So everybody's role kind of varies. So then you hire a composer, and a composer will come on, very often cast in a way similar to an actor or any other employee that of the production. They kind of have to pass a committee of people that want to use them. Usually the director has the final say, and say they want to hire a composer. They say, I like this composer. Nobody knows him, but I went to hear him play at this club and his group was great. So I want to have him do the score. And sometimes those people have experience doing movie scores and they're great. And they already have a list of a resume with things they've done in the past, which is usually the case. They usually go with someone they kind of know does movies, but occasionally they'll hire someone who's never done a movie in their life. And so at that point, the composer has to be connected with a team that helps them create the score, which is a process that is quite technical and involves having everything sort of connected to the film. When the composer writes music, they can think of themes and little ideas that they might want to have, or a certain vibe or groove for certain kinds of music, but they still have to have it match up with what the director's doing, and that coordination is very special, and sometimes requires multiple people to help coordinate it. And they usually make up a mock-up, which is a usually done with samples and synthesizers, where they have actual great samples of orchestral instruments and create the score with or without music. Sometimes at this point, a lot of times they're just working in MIDI with just plunking in sounds and music that isn't even really been assigned instruments. They kind of have ideas about instruments they might use, but it just gives a feel for what the music's like. And the directors are constantly being fed that score, especially near the end of the film process. And so they okay it, or they say, no, it needs to do this. It's fine, but it needs this or this. No, I don't want that kind of thing at all. I want it to be more atmospheric. Okay. I want it to be more subtle. Okay. Or I want it to be more over the top. I want it really angry, so suddenly things get altered, and they're doing all that with all their samples in MIDI. And very often a composer has a team of maybe 10 people all messing with that original idea at home, or whatever, and tweaking the music to sort of further compose it. And so then at that point, once everything's been signed off, they then send the music to orchestrators, who will make a version of it for actual instruments, and they'll either transcribe or read from the MIDI score and create an orchestral score where they assign instruments to the thing. A lot of composers do that, have a hand in that as well, but surprisingly few composers actually write for the instruments specifically when they're putting together the score, because it's still a work in everything's a work in progress, literally till we get to the stage when we were called in. So usually they sometimes have an idea when they're going to record, maybe 3 or 4 months ahead. They'll give you a couple dates that they said, we're going to record these days. And so often it's so easy now with digital editing and digital recording, the director and the composer might go back and forth 100 more times between when we get called and when they actually book the date for us to come in. So sometimes it might be totally different score by the time that we actually get the reminder to come into play. So we might add people, we might subtract people, and so it's kind of a white knuckle time from when we get the original call sometimes to when we were actually there in the studio. Sometimes we kind of like a little drum roll there, because we might get taken off the job. They might suddenly decide they don't want 6 trombones on the call, so now they're just 2 or whatever. Or they might say, no, this is going to be a great trombone movie, we're going to add trombone. So that's cool when that happens. And that has happened, where we've gone from 4 to 6 to 8 trombones because they changed the score around. They wanted more trombone. It's kind of funny.
And that sounds like a good movie.
Oh yeah, those are all the best movies, of course. More trombones. But it's kind of it's a very, and then meantime, there's other composers doing the same thing. So certain times of the year, especially, there might be 4 or 5 movies all vying for time at one of the 2 or 3 sound stages in LA. So there's this logistical element to this that affects us. And it's a scary business in a lot of ways if that's all you do. If you're expecting to only do recording work, it's really hard, because sometimes you end up with 3 dates on one day. So you have to choose, it's like, okay, I'll take this one. And then that one gets canceled. So you're out of luck. There's 2 other jobs happening in town that you could call for both of them maybe, and you end up sitting at home. So that's always kind of a funny situation to get in. Contractors tend to keep with the people they call. If somebody can come back and, I can do that job after all. They very rarely will take off someone who's already accepted it. That's not very fair. So usually that person who turns it down and was not going to be able to get back on it unless there's a problem. And COVID's affected that quite a bit. Sometimes you're on something that you turn down, you end up doing the job you turned down right from the start, but because your other job got changed and somebody got sick on the job you turned down, you end up doing that job. It can get really crazy. Anyway, but that's unusual. The most usual thing that happens is they decide on a score, they've decided on a composer, they've already temped it, and then the composer very often has to work with that temp to create something that either sounds a little bit like it, or maybe builds upon that idea, or maybe comes up with something totally different. That's happened too, where they go against the temp and suddenly it's something, whoa, that's really cool. But when we go into record, very often all the people in the production have been listening to this mock-up for a long time. And that can create some challenges for us as players, because they use samples, and sometimes the samples that they use, like for instance, a trombone playing mezzo piano, but it has a little bit of that bite to it that we get when we play loud. Cuivre, they refer to it as mostly, the French word that means with a brassy sound. So sometimes we get in the studio and we have a mezzo piano marking, and they said trombones, it needs to have more bite. And it's like, well, we're probably gonna have to play it louder to get that sound. So we've had to come, and they say, well, it can't be louder. Okay, what do we do? So sometimes we come up with ideas like we'll mix mutes. Sometimes we'll have every other player in a straight mute, or maybe one or two of us will flutter tongue. We'll just create some different kind of sound that's not just a straight tone with a sound that you've been working your whole life to create. So we kind of have to make adjustments. So the irony is, years ago they were afraid that samples would replace the live players because they were getting so good. But until that happens, the samples create a certain sound that we end up having to imitate. They're trying to get us to replace the sample. So we have to do stuff that kind of, it might go outside our comfort zone. And that's why sometimes we get some really funny markings in our parts, especially the dynamics. They add a lot of dynamics to the mock-ups, because mock-ups they're not human. So they, just to make it sound human, they put all these crazy dynamics. Sometimes I wish I had a part handy I could show you, where you'd have like a dotted half and a quarter and 2/8 notes, and there's 4 dynamics within that. It's like D da 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 da, and when you play it, it's da, 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 da. It's like, it's so crazy. And the first time through we'll play that, but very often the composer goes, wait a minute, no, that's too fussy, just play it mezzo piano. Okay, great. Because that the orchestrator is doing his or her best to try to put everything that's in that mock-up on the page, so that we play it, we know that this is what was in the mock-up. So it's tricky. We have to sort of do a little mind reading sometimes with that stuff. So but most composers I work with are really pretty knowledgeable about live instruments. Some of them are out of rock and roll, or they're keyboardists, they've learned, or they're computer people, and they've never really dealt with live musicians that much. Some were fantastic readers and worked from a score. They worked on paper, and they've been working in the MIDI world. I was speaking with one great world renowned composer who said, I've been doing so little music reading, I've almost lost the skill completely. It's almost like losing a language when you move to another country. And he was trained at a great school in Europe. He went to music school. He went, he was fully educated in music on a very high level. But he says, now I'm working in this MIDI world. It's so different, and I have to have people help me put it on paper now. I said I was writing assignments like crazy when I was in school, but now it's like, wow, I'm just dealing with the sounds themselves in a way that to me that's indicative of a really great musician in a lot of ways, that they can create almost improvisationally on their computers and create these beautiful scores, even though there's no notation until someone is brought in to sort of help make that happen. So anyway, that's sort of the process. And then most of the time, for most movies, it's changed quite a bit. It used to be that a big movie like I don't know, like a Terminator or one of those movies, they might hire a 100-piece orchestra for 2 weeks of sessions, every day from 10 to 5. Now, because of the way things are recorded and the way that they compose the music, it's a variety of things, electronic sounds, different stuff. Very often, the brass section is only brought in to play a little bit. We might only just do two double sessions, which is a 10 to 5, 2 days of 10 to 5, or sometimes just 3 days of singles, like from 2 to 5 or 10 to 2, 10 to 1. And our time put in the movie is very small on certain movies, even big movies. One of the last composers to really record in that way that I was referring to is John Williams. He has a whole orchestra there all the time. He can't work any other way. Matter of fact, he doesn't even use the electronic click track very often when he does his scores. He likes to conduct it. He's such a great conductor that he knows how to place all the timings of his music with a clock, which is old school skill that is like gone the way of the slide rule in a lot of ways. That's the way all the composers used to do it. They'd use a clock and just make sure all their music hit on the right place. And so when you have a great musician like John Williams, that's why his music sounds like real music. He wrote it with the intention of conducting it in real time with real players without a metronome. So that's a real, most composers, even the best ones today, they don't want to take that kind of a risk, and they're not allowed to. John Williams is allowed, and it's such a joy working with him whenever he conducts a score, because it's so much more intense musically on so many levels, not just the music itself, but the performance of it is much more like playing in a real orchestra for an audience. You feel that, you feel this energy and humanity to the score when it's his music. And there are some other composers that can elicit that, but John is of that era where that was everything. That was, they didn't know any different from what we do now in the studio. So that's kind of the thing. So there tends to be a lot of the same people called for a lot of the same composers here in Los Angeles. There are lots of places they can record scores now. Great orchestras in London. There's a great bunch of players freelancing doing this work in Nashville, New York, and even in Vienna. Now there's a great recording in other places too. There's all kinds of places that where this ability, this kind of specialty kind of way of recording is becoming more well known. But it's still really, it's a special thing here in LA where we have so many players. We have generations of players that their parents did this kind of work, and we all learned from amazing veteran players who were doing this their whole life. So we have a kind of an insight and a kind of a tradition here that is palpable every time you walk into a studio here, which is what excited me about this work when I started to get invited to get to do it. It's a really special experience. It's not for everybody. It's not fun a lot of the time. There's the music isn't always great, to be honest, or it's not as a performance experience. It's not great. Sometimes I've been so wrong with how I've judged the music that I've played in the studio. Very often I'll play a score that was like, it's okay. It's all right. And I go to the movie and it's like, wow, this is awesome. So sometimes you don't know what you're playing to, because we're always serving the picture. That's always our job. And that for a lot of musicians is kind of like, well, you're not playing music for music's sake. It's music to serve some commercial interest or something. I think it's just a specific kind of art form where the art is in the collaboration and the connection between the music and the picture that goes back to the earliest days of film. We got back to silent movies. And, in a lot of big cities, the silent movies had full orchestra, a little pit orchestra to play along. It wasn't, we always think of the piano being there, on a silent movie, but in some of the big cities, when a big silent movie, a Valentino movie or a Rin Tin Tin movie came up, well, they had a band there, they had an orchestra. And a lot of those early players were the first ones to play in the studios on the early movies at MGM and places like that, like King Kong, which was the first real big orchestral score for a talkie film. Miklos Roshab wrote that score, and that's still a great score, actually. I mean, he was a composer who knew a lot about orchestral music, and they used a lot of operatic kind of sounds in it. It was an operatic story. So that particular sound is still there. I mean, we still have that big operatic kind of approach to a lot of movie scores we play to this day. So it's a thing that's kind of a part of film. We somehow, as a culture, became used to hearing music in the background while people are doing stuff. It's in video games, it's in television, it's in film. And it's really fascinating how that very old, in a lot of ways, a very old uh, collaborative kind of way of looking at a film and to play up certain parts of a film. You get an idea of the inner thinking and inner thoughts and feelings of a character very often without them saying a word. They act with their face maybe, and then there's this musical thing that you go, okay, they're feeling longing, or they're feeling depressed, or they're feeling hope, or they're feeling some kind of loss or victory. There's every emotion you can imagine has been captured on film with music as a thing to sort of push that out to the audience so that it's really clear. So that I love that when that happens. There was a film I played on, a movie by Pixar called Up. I don't know if you remember that movie.
That was great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember seeing that.
It was a really great score. Michael Giacchino wrote that score, and I played on a lot of Michael's films. He's a fantastic composer, very versatile kind of person in many ways. He's making films now, actually, too. He's worked in video games as both a video game composer and a video game developer, I think, as well. He's just a real interesting person, and he writes great music. He's very he's a real positive, encouraging, respectful person of his musicians that he uses, which is something we really love when we're working with a composer that's really excited about seeing us and we see him, and we just have a great time with him. But on Up, there's that wonderful little silent movie within a movie, which was called Married Life. Married Life. That's the cue, and it's the story of Carl and his wife. Where they get together, they get married, they start a home, and turns out they can't have kids. It's all told in this silent movie and a kid's, comedic kind of cartoon. And then she dies, which is it's such a poignant little setup to why he decided to do this trip. You learn why he wanted to take this balloon thing and attach it to his house and go on an adventure. The whole thing is played out in Married Life. And that music he wrote for Married Life was so perfect for that little moment. And we, without even looking at the picture yet, I mean, when we played it, we went, wow, this is really interesting. It's very intimate. It almost had a folksy kind of feeling to it. And when we all turned around, and sometimes we have the picture playing when we're recording, when we all turned around, it's behind us usually. So when we turned around and watched this with the music in our headphones, all of us were crying. We all went, oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is so perfect for this moment. And the music told that story. And I still hear it. I hear it on TikTok videos. And I hear it on all kinds of stuff that people know that what that music means apart from the movie, the way that John Williams music is known apart from the movie sometimes, So I was really fortunate. I feel I got to play on that. And I actually have a little solo on that, playing in a solotone mute. Michael loved putting us in the solotone mutes for old style music that he would sometimes write. And it was a very challenging thing, as I recall. So that was really fun to get an opportunity that just dropped in my lap without any warning. And so that was really fun to get to play that. But everybody who played on that movie was very proud of that little piece that Michael wrote. We were proud for him, and we're proud of ourselves for getting to do it. It was really one of those special moments that doesn't come up too often. As my colleague Steve Holtman, who's a great trombonist here in Los Angeles, I play with a lot. He's a fantastic tenor bass trombonist. He's a writer and just got many, many, many skills. He likes to say, and he's also a very funny guy. He says, usually the only time they really want to use trombones is if there's a tank or a clown in the scene. So that becomes our defaults, our two settings, very often something comedic or something scary. And if a parent loses a child, that's a viola solo. And if it's Americana, it's gonna be a clarinet solo or a distant trumpet solo. It's like you have all these little archetypes for the instruments, and that they work. I mean, that a lot of composers take advantage of that and use those sounds that they've heard before in other movies. That's why a lot of movie music sometimes sounds like other movie music or other kinds of music that you've heard, because it worked. And then your job as a composer is not to necessarily make something new and innovative. It's to match what the director wants. And that's where a lot of composers have traditionally over time been a little bit skeptical about film music, because it's not really music for music's sake to them. So, but I think that some of the most incredible collaborations between directors and composers happen. Steven Spielberg and John Williams being the most obvious, but there've been others. I think James Newton Howard and the Indian director's name is escaping me. Sixth Sense, that movie.
Shyamalan.
Shyamalan, yeah. They've done all kinds of really interesting collaborative things, and so anyway, and he's another great composer too. And so it is interesting, and there's always new composers coming up with different ways of thinking about the orchestra. I mean, Hans Zimmer really changed things a lot with the way he worked and created scores, having a huge team of people working on different parts of the project, and providing a one-stop shop in a lot of ways for creating a massive kind of score that I don't think one person could necessarily have come up with that kind of score that he did for like Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, he wrote these great themes and then shot it off to a bunch of his assistants, and they tweaked it and played with it, and it just becomes this incredible. It almost becomes like open source code or something, where everybody kind of adds on and makes this thing that's no one person could have necessarily created, but it works great. And I love I've got to play in a lot of Hans Zimmer scores, and his stuff is fun to play.
Can I ask you, when you get called in to play a session, is there any rehearsal at all, or do they just hand you the music and you just go for it?
Depends. The last few years, they have been sending out parts, but most of us, we just look through to see if we have to bring what instruments we need to bring. there's something about if you practice your parts ahead of time, it really, unless somebody, maybe the copyist might give you a warning, like, oh yeah, you got this big thing in this cue, you might want to look at it. Okay. But I think the energy, the excitement of the session in a lot of ways comes from the actual process of recording it. And I like having that first run through being a sight read thing. It's just, to me, it's exciting. It forces you to play in a way that you can't get too intellectual about what you can't pre-think too much, because we make so many changes in the music as we go, that and it's usually to do with the picture. It's not our performance necessarily. They might ask for something dynamically, but because there's dialogue, we got to bring it down. So there's so many things that we need to change. They change the parts a lot. You have to be quick on your feet. Like they might say, oh, that lick that starts on beat 3 that should start a half beat earlier, can you move that whole lick off to the left half a beat? So you have to be quick and be able to do the math and change it real quickly. And if you've been sitting there practicing that thing all the way through a certain way, you're kind of done. You've got it already programmed in your head. It's going to take you an extra second to get out of that, to be able to play it on a different part of the beat. The sight readers who haven't looked at it ahead of time, they can make that change because they're not as married to that original idea. Little things like that. But I think the excitement of a first take is really one of my favorite things about a recording studio. Everybody's on the edge of their seats, wanting to just really play in good time, good rhythm, together, balanced, and just get that spirit going right away. If you spent too much time working on your part yourself, it's funny, but I think sometimes you don't really think in terms of the people around you in the room. And I think it's better when we all kind of discover it together and we find that way to play it. And it's magical. But we start recording now on the first take. The red light goes on, we're recording. Now they usually record, most people, and this is a pretty big generalization, will record till we get it right once as a group, that there's not anything that they haven't already played that they can edit in something that they need. If one of the, I'll say this with glee, if perhaps one of the French horn players clams a note, which that instrument, that's the nature of the beast. Occasionally they do, although our horn players are so good, they are like, in certain ways they are machines over there with their consistency and beautiful sound. I love our French horns, so I don't mean to pick on them too much, but if they happen to make a little mistake, they can maybe have another take that they can edit that together now. It's so easily with the digital recording. So if we get a really good take, but there's that one little mistake, they can harvest it maybe from an earlier take that wasn't so great, but that bar was good. So then they usually try to get 2 of those takes that are as a whole pretty darn good, have the spirit, have the right balance, and the right time. Time is most important. So that's kind of the way we do it. Once we have 2 complete takes most of the time, with many exceptions to that, but that's the way most of the composers that seem to last, that's what they really want. They get 1 take and a backup in case they hear something later on that they need to edit together. So that's sort of the way we go. We turn up and you just turn it over, go to the next thing and do it the same way. We usually end up recording about, for most movies, big action movies, a 2-hour movie, there might be anywhere between 60 and 90 minutes of music, which is a lot of music. That's a lot of sound for a composer to compose in a month or two. Some of the more talky kind of movies, more of a dramatic movie with sparser score, might be 30 to 45 minutes of music, but that's pretty rare these days. Most of the times when we go in to record, there's music almost beginning to end. And I've done some films, like some of those Pirates movies. We did, like, for one of them, one of the sequels, I think it was like a 2.5-hour movie. We did like 5 hours of music. So they had all these options to drop in things where they needed it, if they can make decisions. But most movies don't have that kind of budget to be able to keep a 100-piece orchestra in a studio for hours and hours and hours to record that much music. So
I'm sure that takes a lot of money to pay all those guys.
It is quite a math problem. And the people who contract these movies, who put together the orchestras, they do a lot of unpaid time where they put together a budget for a director or composer or whoever's the music supervisor or whoever. They put together a budget and they make all the calls, and they start putting out the feelers for the orchestra, and they spend hours, I think we need more strings than that. Okay, well, blah, 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 we do that and redo the budget. And it's a lot of stuff. And then, oh, now we're going to go to London. It's like, that happens sometimes, it's like, it's so frustrating for the contractors, but everybody within the immediate chain, wherever right or left of you in the chain is dealing with people throwing down all kinds of changes in the schedule, in the kind of music, in the size of the orchestra, that all this, there's so many variables, so that the person in that hub of all this information has to be really flexible. And so it requires us to be not take it too hard sometimes when we get the schedule that gets changed pretty drastically. And it can be frustrating sometimes to have a really nice composer with a really nice movie 3 or 4 months in advance. And there's we call freeways out here by we put the in front of them all, right? We say the 5 freeway or the 405 freeway. And very often with my friends, when we get a call that's so far in advance, sometimes I'll say, looks like we have a little basket of kittens on the 405. It's like, you just know it's way up in the distance, but this is a very dangerous place for those kittens to be, because it might be taken out any second. You just never know. So you have to plan your life accordingly too. Sometimes you have to make vacation time and family time very challenging for people, especially when people are just starting out, where they really want to take every call that comes in. There's no tenure in our job. The only tenure you have is how you played the last gig you did. And even that sometimes is not the best way to ensure that you're going to get called back again. They can say we're names in a phone book, so they can start calling other people whenever they want. And forever, that person might just suddenly start doing the work you'd been doing. And there's sometimes no fanfare or warning. It happens. It's happening to friends of mine right now. I mean, it's just a tough thing. It might be happening to me. I don't even know it yet. So for me, I've always loved to do lots of different things. So if my work kind of balance has always been shifting around all the time. Things become more popular, less popular. They think of me as a certain thing, and then they don't. I had a reputation for a while. I was doing a lot of Latin groups, salsa, and it was just sort of weird. Magically, I was no longer doing it. But that was okay with me. I was doing other things too, so I didn't there was no hard feelings about it. But and I don't think I was playing it any worse than I was when I was playing it all the time. But that's the nature of our crazy business. So that's a sort of an overview of the challenges of facing people who are doing this kind of freelance, kind of crazy stuff. It can be very frustrating, and I've seen people sort of fall off the list for a while and then get back on. That happens too. And then but some people come on really quick and they stay. Some people get on really quick and then they disappear. Some people are there forever and they kind of stay. They're the people that no one wants to get rid of for some reason. Those people are very few and far between. And I got to be honest, some of them probably should relax and not be playing anymore. That happens. This stuff is not meant to last forever. This is a very delicate surface to put a career on. So there's 101 things, if not more, that can start taking you out of doing your best performance. And some of it's lack of regular practice, which I've seen also with some people. But it's not meant to be a lifetime commitment. And so I'm always thinking about those things, when I'm ready to, hopefully I'll be able to make the call. And probably not. I mean, it's probably somebody else will decide, let's try somebody else. Let me get somebody kind of sounds like him, I guess.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Is it the Long Beach Symphony you're in?
Yeah.
Is that a more or less a full-time orchestra, or how many concerts do you do with them a year?
It's listed by the union as a ROPA orchestra, which is a regional orchestra. We do we have a pops series and a classic series, and then other things that come up. We sometimes do other concerts on an as needed basis. But we're all we have tenured spots, but it's a per service orchestra. We're not salaried, so it's not a moneymaker, but it's a great outlet for music. And I'm very proud to be a part of it. And it's an orchestra that had a lot of trouble during COVID. We really kind of went down for the count there for a while. We were all worried about its future, but it seems to be coming back. And there's a pretty good community support for it's a community-based orchestra. In a lot of ways, it relies on donations and fundraising, like so many orchestras. and it's all pros. It's a union job, and you audition for your chair and all that kind of stuff. But I'd say we do about, at one point, I think we were doing maybe 10 or 15 classics concerts and maybe 10 uh, pops concerts on Saturdays, that. And then there'd be kiddie concerts, maybe maybe a week of kiddie concerts every once in a while. And then there are other ensembles that came out of that. I've actually booked some jazz kinds of concerts that management has had me, hey, can you go play a jazz concert? This little, that just last, I think it was last year, I played a wonderful little jazz concert at a shared um, garden, in a community garden, where a lot of people, buy a little, you get a little spot and you can plant your tomatoes or whatever you want. And it was this very big space underneath some electrical wiring, the electrical wires. And so it was great. And there were about, a couple hundred people, and we played a little under a tent. I'd put a little quartet together. We played some jazz. So that was through the symphony, but that was a lot of fun. And then we also have chamber groups that go out to schools and do concerts around town. And sometimes the management will even, get a call from somebody to put a group together for some event or something, and they'll call the symphony, and they can't afford the whole orchestra. So they'll just maybe send out a group to do it, almost acting like a contractor or a promoter. So that's kind of a fun part of our job too. But we have a fairly new music director, and he's great. He's very enthusiastic. He's really great with kids at the kiddie concerts. That's one of the things I've been really impressed with our Eckhart Prue, who's our conductor. And we get to do some fun concerts. There've been a lot of budget cuts, so we're not doing so many big pieces. Like we can't really add enough players for a Mahler symphony right now. So that's going to be a while before we get back into that repertoire. But we do a lot of the Beethoven and Brahms kind of concerts, and a lot of Schubert and things like that. So it's great. I love playing in the orchestra, and they sometimes use that orchestra as a backup for a Mozart Requiem or something too. So we might do that. And yeah, it's great. I love having an outlet, and I also sub with the Santa Barbara Symphony and the Pasadena Symphony, which are both similar orchestras here. And I sometimes go down and play with San Diego Symphony a couple times. And really, the fun thing I've gotten to do recently is with Seth MacFarlane. We at on New Year's Eve, the voiceover animator, genius director of Family Guy and all those other cartoons. He's also a great jazz singer, standards, American songbook singer. And he does a concert every year for New Year's Eve, either in San Francisco or Boston. So he flew up a few of the players that play in his band, a rhythm section, and myself, and Dan Higgins on saxophone, and a trumpet player from London named Mike Lovett. And they flew us up to San Francisco for a concert with him, which is always really fun. I've played a few other times with the San Francisco Symphony, which has been fun to get to do a couple movie concerts. I filled in when they were short a player. That was a lot of fun. So you're playing along with a movie live, and they do quite a bit of that up there. So, and it's always fun to see they're now, it's almost like a little home away from home up there for me when I get to play. It's really fun. We have a great time. So yeah, so I love doing that kind of stuff. I love subbing. Subbing was a big part of my career for so many years. As I got a little bit more established as more of a on the list with the contractors, I'm people tend to sub for me more now, I guess, but I love subbing. I love going in and like Andy Martin does a lot of Broadway show work, and I used to sub for him quite a bit. Now that's a thrill. You go to a show, you sit next to him, you watch the show, and then the next day you come in, play the show. And so it's a white knuckle ride for sure. And I've always loved that adrenaline rush from subbing for somebody on a show. And so that's I enjoy doing that. And I've now also sort of re-emerged into some of the rehearsal bands in Los Angeles, which are bands that just get together and read new music and maybe do a concert here or there. And I've been out of that kind of scene for a long time. I was very active in it in the 80s and 90s, but as I was working more, it was harder for me to commit to those sorts of things on a regular basis. So I kind of fell off those lists, and it was always bummed me out, because that's really my roots as a professional player, is in that kind of music. But recently it's worked out really well that some of these younger composers and players are saying, hey, you want to sub for me? And yeah, absolutely. So I'm back in with a whole new group of guys and girls who are twice my age, or I'm twice their age now. I get to be the old guy, which is fun. I love it. I love coming in there and playing, and I learn from them. And, I get to check out all these great young new players that are in Los Angeles right now, which is just so inspiring.
Yeah.
We're
LA is just full of good big bands
Oh
from what
yeah,
I've
there's so
seen.
many, and there's new ones all the time. And there's some that have been around for years that no one knows because all they do is rehearse. They might play a gig once in a while, but they have these great arrangements and very talented writers. And yeah, it's quite a scene. I remember when I was in the '80s, you could go down to the Musicians Union in Hollywood, and there'd be three rooms going with bands rehearsing. A band would rehearse from 10 to 1, another band would come in, go from 1 to 3, and another one would come in that night from at 7 o'clock. So there was like, 12, 15 bands a day rehearsing down there. And it was exciting. You could just go down and listen and meet people. And some of the best players doing session work would sometimes go in there and play to keep their chops up and to keep their, especially the improvising stuff going. And I loved it. I loved doing all those bands. I played with Bob Florence for many years, which was one of those bands at the Union, and it was great. And I got that during that time. Of course, I got my best mentoring experience with sitting next to the great Charlie Loper, who's, from my perspective, the greatest lead trombone player I've ever heard. He was such a great big band lead trombone player, and he laid it down in such a beautiful way. It was always right. Like every time you'd hear him play lead, was whatever the style, whether it was a Count Basie thing or a Duke Ellington style thing or an old swing or more modern, whatever, Kenton, whatever it was, he knew how to do it just right. So it was tasteful, in tune, in time, and just so consistent. And I sat next to him for 15 years on that band. And that's probably the best single education I had. Every time I walked out of he wouldn't talk much. He wouldn't tell people what to do, but the way he played lead was had such authority and clarity and consistency that it was, you knew that if it didn't sound right, it was you. It wasn't him. So he set a high standard. We all talk about how much he's influenced us, and he's still around. He's in his late 80s now. He's got a birthday this month. He might be in the big 90. Actually, he must be close to it. But he's in his late 80s. And he still sounds really good. He's basically retired, but he's still playing some of those bands, and still he's great. He's always a wonderful person. And I grew up listening to him locally a lot. I heard him when I'd go to concerts. It was Charlie on lead trombone a lot of the time, and I would just sit in awe of sitting in front of him with this beautiful, just immediate, compact, beautiful sound that could almost, he could sit in an orchestra, how round and beautiful and resonant his sound was. And he was a great player on playing first trombone on movies. He could transfer his lead trombone. For some reason, he was one of the few that could really play great lead trombone in a big band, but then transfer that approach and just adjust enough to make it sound like, the top of a big fat, you know, Wagnerian chord. Oh yeah, Charlie's sound was perfect for that. He could do it all. Yeah, I really was inspired by him as a player, and then as a colleague. He's just amazing. Yeah.
Uh, do you did you play on Rich Willie's CD he did a few years ago? Rich from
Yeah,
Asheville.
Rich. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we did that at in Hollywood. We recorded that at Sunset Sound, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Rich is somebody
Oh,
I've known. He
Rich.
used to direct our little big band here in Spartanburg.
Yeah.
He lives up in Asheville, North Carolina.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Rich is a very talented arranger and composer, great improviser, and a beautiful, beautiful teacher and author. Those books he's written are so good. And he's fantastic. I was really impressed when I got to meet him and play with, and we had a great time playing recording that music. It was
yeah,
fun. Yeah, it was a lot of
I
fun.
bought that CD from him. It's really good.
Yeah, great
So,
band. It was a great band. I think he was happy with the band. We had a ball.
well, he had a who's who on that band. I know.
Yeah, we had
It
some good
was.
players. There were some great players on the band for sure.
I doubt if he'll ever make his money back off those recording sessions.
None of us
But
do big. Anybody who does a big band record, you're not in it for the money for sure. If you are,
yeah,
you're crazy. Unless you go another route, you have to think of it in other ways.
but
Like I think the business model that seemed to work really well for him is Gordon Goodwin, where he does concerts. He's a single entity as a composer and as a performer, and he's also been able to take his band all over the world touring with his band, and it works, and it's got a popular appeal. Now it's not going to make the money Britney Spears is going to it was making or anything, but you're gonna have a long life with the approach that he's had. I think it was always smart. He was always smart that way, to be able to appeal to a different crowd. That was really good for him to do. And I think there's some other big bands around that are starting to do that too a little bit, where they take the music into a slightly different direction, either artistically or just in a slightly hip commercial way. Commercial music now is such a wide open thing, with music being delivered in so many different ways than it was 30 years ago. And I think if you can find that niche of people who are waiting for what you do, and you can get to them, you can make something happen. It's possible. And, again, you're not going to get filthy rich, but you might be able to have a sustainable existence as a musician that way. So many different options for people. We've seen so many great strides that certain people have taken, and some people who are more traditional in the way they approach things have also been to tap into the either social media or just the basic internet approach to delivering their music and their musical message. It's I think it's a really exciting time to be a musician right now. There's many options. Some of them are a little scary to those of us who grew up maybe thinking of it a certain way, but I think there's lots of options now that weren't there for a lot of people. For somebody, say, my age, because I'm 61 now, but somebody
Oh, I
my age,
got you by a year.
yeah. So somebody, in our situation, I think sometimes we might need a little help with somebody who's, I always like to say, I need to call a millennial. I very often say that, somebody who's got the experience in dealing with some of this stuff. And outlook, it's not just the knowledge of the buttons and stuff, but it's also just to think, to do that. It sometimes takes someone to think very differently than what would be out of the box thinking for you. They just kind of, some of these people just kind of know, oh yeah, you do this. And really, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Just do that. So I think it's really good to keep on top of certain things and to hang out with people that are, it's just like when we were learning to become musicians, they always say, put yourself near the people doing what you want to do. And for me now, a lot of those people are a lot younger than me. Used to be the reverent all-star players here in LA. There's so many that you'd want to sort of cozy up to, or just, glean some osmosis from them of what they do, or go hear them play, or maybe take a lesson with them. That was the way we did it, and maybe get a chance to play with them. Now it's different. You have to, there's different ways of collaborating online. I think with COVID, I didn't have a home studio before COVID, so I had to put it together real quick, and it was immediate that we started doing projects at home. So I learned Pro Tools real fast, and only to the point where the stuff that I need, I haven't even made a dent in this software in 2.5 years in a lot of ways, but I can record myself at home now, which is a huge, for me, was a huge step of getting past my technophobic perspective. I always try to stay at least 5 years behind everybody else. So and I'm very successful at that. But I have pretty good equipment now. I've got some great mics, and I have, I've got preamps, and I can speak the language a little bit. I can sort of fake my way through conversation with an engineer now that I couldn't, 4 or 5 years ago. And I've been able to record some really great things. We did Bridgerton. The whole orchestra recorded at home. Recorded all the music for a couple different TV shows. Animaniacs, the cartoon. We started off recording everything at home. It's a 30-piece orchestra, each of us recording our parts at home. And those poor engineers, however they did it, I don't know how they did it, but different people on different mics in different acoustical situations with different interpretations of what in time and in tune is.
Yeah.
Without the other players sitting there with them. It's a challenge, but we came up with some cool little systems. Alan Kaplan was the principal trombone on all those cartoons. He's so great at it. Another mentor of a player that I've learned so much from. But he would record his part, and then he would send it to the other two trombone players, and we record our part with him. So that got pretty good. We got a pretty good system of being able to play right with Al. When we sent in our stuff, at least we were with him, and they could take us and then move us to where the trumpets and the rest of the band are, or whatever. So that was one less step for the engineer to have to fret over, to make sure the trombones were together. We were all together. And so if they had to move us around, they could do it as a group rather than 3 separate tracks all moving around. We still do some recording occasionally at home, but it's usually just maybe a solo, or I'll record all the parts here, because I have all the full low brass stuff here. contrabass trombone, bass trombone,
Oh wow.
tenor, alto, euphonium, tuba, everything. So I have quite a few projects that come up that I do all the stuff here at home. And when they're really short of money, but I always try to say, if you want a tuba player, get a tuba player. But if you're really cheap, I'm your guy.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been great, Alex. I really appreciate you taking your time to talk to me today.
Absolutely. I
This
think we
is
got. I think we went into some different directions than what I'm used to. You know, hopefully that gives you and your audience some things to think about. And you know, I'm usually available for follow up if people want to reach me online. I'm on Facebook, and my my website. You can reach me at my website anytime, alexilestrombone.com.
okay.
If anybody has any questions or follow up or anything, I'm more than happy to respond. Especially right now, it's kind of slow, so I can usually get back to people fairly quickly.
Yeah, you're very active on Facebook, and I think on the trombone forum and
Yeah,
various
yeah.
internet sites.
I came on the trombone pedagogy page. I was invited by Brad uh, to be a moderator. So that was so I started being a moderator for that. So I had that's been a really enjoyable experience for me. I've learned a lot from people that participate. I've learned a ton. I find out a lot of new music. But I really have learned a lot about communication with people and how to be a little bit more conscious about how I write things and how I ask questions and answer questions. So it's been useful. I'm not always nobody's myself and definitely included as nobody's perfect, but my goal with that with my as a moderator is to keep the questions flowing and the answers respectful and to the point. And they can go into long I don't mind tangents that spur on that are part of the conversation. Sometimes we get some really long threads that go into all sorts of stuff. I have no problem with that. But I, you know, if it's just when it starts getting into that territory of like, this is not really helping, and some people are starting to get a little offensive. So I just try to keep everybody be able to walk away feeling good from what we're talking about, and hopefully it's about teaching the trombone and trombone, you know, rather than anything else, politics or any of that stuff. It's like there's another place for that. You know, there's other places you can talk to your heart's content. But it's been really interesting. It's affected my teaching a lot. I've gained so many great ideas from people, even students that write in and have ideas. That's great. For a while, we didn't want too many students to participate. It was the idea was this was going to be primarily for teachers. And I was kind of more on that side of things, but the more I thought about it, and as we started to open up the channels a little bit, I think it was great that students can go on there and either check out the conversations or ask great questions for the teachers to actually give them some things to think about. You know, we can't diagnose over the internet or really teach a lesson, but you maybe give them some questions to give their teacher. So anyway, that's my, I really appreciate that. And I really do enjoy that site. I think the concept of it originally that Brad had was phenomenal. And I think we've tried really hard to be as inclusive and keep the spirit of what he intended intact.
Yeah, I had a couple of lessons from him a few years back when he was still at South Carolina.
South Carolina, yeah.
So,
he's great. I've done some stuff with him in his school in Arizona, and we've hooked up at the you know, when we see each other at the trombone events and stuff. He's a great guy and just a fantastic teacher and wonderful player. I really he walks the walk for sure, and he's got great those books are just they're classics. I mean, they're all really great resource that he's created and continues to create. He's got more ideas than most anybody else I know. He's always thinking of new stuff and following through. He's great.
Okay. All right. Well, I was trying to say goodbye 5 minutes ago.
I know. I'm
sorry. I didn't want to take up too much of your time.
It's fine. It's fine. Me neither. I'm sorry if I took up too much.
Oh, no. This is great. This is the perfect podcast. I ask a short question and get a long answer.
Oh yeah, well that's me too.
That's the perfect podcast.
My wife is constantly giving me grief. Just keep your answers shorter. You go on and start droning on.
All right.
All right. Well, take care, Mike. Good luck with it.
Okay.
All right, man.